Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everybody. Today we have author Kathleen P. Allen joining us to talk about her book. It is called Stuck in Our Screens, Setting Aside Social Drama and Restoring Human Connection. This is such a timely book, and boy, do we need it now more than ever. It's available on Amazon, so go check it out there. So welcome, Kathleen. How are you?
Good, Lisa. Thank you.
It is good to have you on the show. I think this is something really, it's so funny because I feel like we compartmentalize like, okay, children shouldn't have so much phone time. Thinking about things like when we were in school, we weren't allowed to even bring a calculator, and now we've got our phones checking us into hotels where we lose connection. We bag our own groceries. We're losing customer service of an actual voice on the other end of a phone. So when I started thinking about all these different ways and going through your book, you really call it like we've kind of checked out as adults, like internationally. Yeah, this is like a universal, horrible phenomenon.
I fear that it is. It always takes a long time to catch up with the technological changes and sort out the good ones from the ones that aren't so good, the ones that we should hang on and adapt our lives around. But that is not always the best way to think about it. Sometimes we have to, let a few of those technological changes go by the wayside. And I just think we're spending way too much time living through our screens right now.
I agree. We really are. But I think it's important when why people go on a date or they go like a couple's dates, you know what I mean? Or dinner out and people have their phone. I was actually at a conference that the actually part was through everyone's speeches. We were watching and hearing phones go off while people were speaking. They had their ringtones on. They were texting. And it was like, and even as a speaker, I looked out at someone and went, all right, so now my biggest competition is a phone to get information across that people came to want to hear.
I completely agree with you. I have been involved in education my entire life of one form or another. And when phones became part of the accoutrements that people would bring into the classroom, it changed everything. And not for the best, because I felt like our engagement was hampered by the presence of the phones and asking people to put them away. Some people find that offensive.
Yeah, well, some musicians ask people to put their phones away because they're not 100% into the music. And then some of them are like, cool, take all the pictures you want. We like the promotion, so it's kind of an interesting, this really touches everything as you make a case for it in your book.
Yes, it does touch everything. One of the things that I've had experience with in the last couple of years is watching my grandchildren from the time they're born observe screens, and it starts with the television. There's sound, there's movement, there's color. And by 6 months, my grandchildren were fixated with their parents' cell phones. And I mention in the book the issue of technoference, which is a term that was invented to describe the negative influences that cell phones and paying attention to screens influences our lives and our interactions. And there are videos that have been taken by researchers of parents talking on their phones and then their children's behavior at the same time. And, all kinds of things to get parents' attention. And as you said, people go out in public in places and spaces where we would expect them to want to be engaging with each other, and instead they're looking at their phones.
So I know a lot of us were worried about youth of today, but then you're also talking about we as adults are becoming the youth through this. We're acting like not necessarily youth as in that we're young at heart, but we're actually not shedding our adolescent behavior. So are we just stepping into an older version of a teenager and carrying on these habits that we're supposed to drop? It's like we're supposed to get adult enough to know you can't have dessert for breakfast every day, though some of us try still.
Yes, I do think that we've adopted behaviors that have, in my research, I found to be typical of youth. And by that, I mean the aspect of social drama, which is a response to an interaction that is upsetting to one party or another. Young people, in my research, I found that young people engaged in social drama more often than not as an attempt to figure out who they are, to create their identity, to get to sort themselves out so that, by the time they grow into adulthood and become more mature, they don't have to be overreactive and excessively emotional about small, petty little, upsets. And I see that moving its way into adult behavior, influentials, people who are supposed to be mature and, have self control and not be impulsive or act like they're entitled are behaving the way young people do. And when I started writing my book, I was primarily focusing on adolescent behavior. And then I realized that it was grossly unfair to point the finger at kids who were behaving this way when adults were behaving far worse and in very, very explosive and public kinds of ways. And one of the questions I ask in my book is, where have the grown-ups gone? Because it's time for us to be grown-ups and to behave maturely. And kids get a pass because they're growing.
But
But
we're
we're
also not leading, well, we're leading by example, right? That's how we lead. So when I looked at, the last 2 decades, two, maybe even 3 decades of political campaigns, all sides, all of them have run with attacks, video attacks, ads that are attacks. I don't care if it's municipal to presidential. And these are adults that you're supposed to say are your community leaders. No, matter how small or how big, if it's nationally or just your local in municipality. This behavior, what does it say to the youth when we're telling them, behave, you're not supposed to act like this, but we're seeing the leaders actually act this way in a lot of circumstances. I shouldn't generalize, but I'm saying our percentage is definitely like 70 to 100% of not being adult. Uh-oh.
Yeah. And, we know that kids imitate adult behaviors. One of the things I write about in my book is reality TV. Reality TV is meant to be entertaining, but for some people, it opens the door and gives them permission to behave badly because they see people they think who are not acting, but are, really behaving as themselves in horrific kinds of ways. And the other thing that I found in as I was doing research to write this book was that the more our real world blends and spills over to non-reality, the harder it is, particularly for young people, to understand
Mm.
that the two sometimes come together and they need to be able to sort out what's real and what's not real. And the amount of information that people consume that's put up online, that plus bad behavior has a tendency, I think, to blur the lines for people. And it's hardest, I think, for young people because they haven't had enough life experiences yet to be able to be critical of the media that they consume and understand that they shouldn't be putting all kinds of poor behavior up online, on social media and putting it out there for friends, thinking that it's fun and entertaining when it really can have a negative effect on lots.
Well, it hasn't bullying it has not necessarily gone down, it's gone up. And you talk about your daughter having to go through some of that, and that's even right before we had the almighty cell phone.
Oh, yes. We went through experiences with bullying and social drama. I have to, having studied a lot about the subject of bullying, particularly bullying in schools, those scars don't go away. The experiences of rejection and meanness and cruelty, they leave a little bit of a residual pain there that doesn't ever really truly heal.
Do you think right now, with what is happening in society in regards to, we're, there's like an effort to be kinder and more compassionate, in our society, and then there's a complete other side squishing that. And so it's really hard for young people right now to, it's like, yes, you can second guess an adult. I'm going to tell them, please do it.
Yeah. And I think that we have to point out to our young people, when an adult is behaving badly and it's very public, we have to say that kind of behavior is mean, it's hurtful, and promote a better understanding of empathy. Empathy is a learned skill, and you can teach people to be empathic. And when we do it, the best way for doing it with children is when they're little, modeling it. I understand you're upset. I would be upset if that happened to me too. Let's think about how this all happened. Let's figure out if we can repair some of the hurt that has taken place. All of those soft social emotional skills, we assume adults have acquired them, but I would have to say I think there's lots of adults that could do better when it comes to being civil to one another and solving problems instead of making them worse by behaving aggressively.
Well, do you think social media has really ramped it up as well? Obviously, the politicians have been doing it. Movie stars, musicians, they do it too. They have these public feuds using social media. Twitter is like the one that has been dominant in that. But, people fight. I see on just like even Facebook, someone will, attack a movie star's weight or, and I'm like, wow, if I was like that famous, the last thing I would want to do is also read all those comments. And that's the thing. It's like people want this influencer life. And then what are you influencing? And then what's going to happen when people start to be as mean to you on Instagram or wherever it is? It's like people can hide in this. They become this extra layer of bully. And then does it go into real life eventually because we're becoming more desensitized by not communicating in person?
I think you said it very well. There's a lot of good things about computers and screens. I
Hmm.
don't live where my grandchildren live. So I love the fact that I can FaceTime with them frequently. But that's a different kind of communication from posting on social media. One of the things I write about in the book is how screens desensitize us. When we can't see the person's facial expressions or hear a tone of voice in response to what we've said, then we lose something and we become disinhibited and we are more likely to say mean things, or experience that empathy. Empathy, you see that you've caused someone to be hurt and you feel a sense of responsibility for that hurt. So you pull back and you apologize. But that process gets cut off in the social media world where people just, civility is often, non-existent, I'm afraid.
What about ghosting?
I think that
Oh, you had no reaction to that.
those kinds of behaviors are just so inhumane.
And it
And
goes in the business world. It's not just, relationships, romantic relationships. It's with friendships. It's with family. It's with business. And even, well, that's happening in customer service now.
yes, yes.
You know,
One of the things that we've learned about schools and kids is that when schools have a really solid digital citizenship program where they teach kids, the ins and the outs of social media and how to have relationships that are healthy and positive using social media and how to respond to bullying and critical, components of relationships, those kids do better. And we also know that when parents are involved with their kids' social
mhm.
media consumption, they're that give and take, that influence of a mature adult, kids to recognize, where the boundaries should be. So I'm not suggesting that we completely eliminate screens, but the less time we spend on them, I think the healthier we can be.
I agree. I think it's a balance. And it's like, are we going to let AI take over our communication versus in person? There's tools. And maybe if we could go back to these are our tools, not a lifestyle, you know?
I just had a conversation with someone last night who is involved in the AI industry, and he was making a case for how valuable that can be to us in terms of our intellectual growth. But human development is not just intellectual, it's physical, emotional, social, psychological, spiritual. Being smart, yes, of course, we all want strong cognitive development. But we're not just that. We are so many other things. And our ability to connect with one another is dependent upon some of those other dimensions of our humanity.
I totally agree. I totally agree. We can't let it all go. And then it's like, trying to be outdoors from inside. Being outside is being outside where you hear the birds. It's like going to see wildlife in the wild versus a zoo where something's contained. And then you say, oh, I know wildlife from a zoo. No, you don't. You know the basics, but you don't have that connection of what a wild animal is. Let's put it that way. It's not the same. It is really different, so it's a very, yeah. And then people start to really, how many times do you have a new phone, and "Oh, this craze is here, now we're all on blue sky, no, now we're all here, now we're all there." I find that it also becomes the split up of people where, here, I'm the influencer, you are the sheep. And that's also like a class division in that kind of way, not necessarily financially, but I'm the leader, you're the sheep. You need to be influenced by me. I don't even like the word influencer. It's the dealer.
Well, it's interesting. You asked me a bit ago, do I have a web page? And I do
Mm,
not, as I explained. And so, having written a book that is critical of spending too much time on our screens, it would be pretty hypocritical of me if I had, all kinds of stuff about myself splashed all over. I don't have a Facebook account right now. I'm not on Instagram. And part of it is a deliberate effort on my part because I don't want my life to become controlled by the
mm.
screen, social media, and the influencers because of that kind, as you said, that kind of influence and control over what we think and what we do.
Because it controls the algorithms of what you see. And so now AI is all coming together. So, I mean, we're putting in what we want to see, right? But where do we go in finding new things? I mean, it's like we're the blend because we have a lot of different interests. And if somebody's interested in history, they're going to be interested probably in culture and the arts. And if you're into the arts, you might be interested in music and fiction. And if you're into that, well, hey, you may be into travel. So it's all connected. And when you look at education, it's the web of life. And so what I'm thinking is we're slowly, well, actually, not slowly, we're cutting up the web of life and going, no, you can only do this over here because this algorithm is that, and you've put this in. So therefore, that is who you are. And you're stuck looking at the same thing instead of expanding your horizons. Because it also becomes that I think people become more shut-ins. If they don't have friends nearby, maybe they're living in a new town, maybe very social, kind of an introvert person, you can get attached to your Alexa, you can get attached to social media and not go out as much. And then where's your learning? Only what you put in? What about discovering something new? There's an argument 100% against what I just said too, but
The internet has been helpful to people who are marginalized.
yes.
It's offered them opportunities to create relationships with people that they aren't physically close to. But I think on the other hand, I know I write about this a little bit in the book. There's a great deal of loneliness and isolation. And is maybe you choose you want to be by yourself, but loneliness is something that's oppressive and imposed upon you. And I think that the increases in anxiety and depression, certainly among youth, but I think also among adults, is sometimes due to that disconnection that comes with too much screen time and not
Mm.
enough face-to-face physical interaction with people. I recently retired, and so I left behind a community of people. And it's very difficult to replace that
Oh,
when
yeah.
and so I understand why people might run to their screens for entertainment and amusement and certain kinds of, the feeling of connection, but it's not real connection. It it's missing something that nurtures us as human beings.
Yeah, because it's not even an art. If it's a book, it's different. A book can be an escape and a piece of education, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, right? It's enhancing your life and creating, sparking imagination and creativity. So when we look at this too, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. But what about those who go on, especially our youth, and I've seen adults do this, get upset if they post a picture on one of the social media things and they don't get instant hits. No, I'm not this. Then there's this popularity thing. Oh, well, if I post this, I'll get more. And I'm like, what, if you're not doing this as a business, what do you care? Like, I'd put a lot more raunchier, like, jokes up on my personal Facebook page if it wasn't business attached. I'm telling you, it'd be a lot more fun over there. But, but people are doing this out of ding, ding, ding. It's like a casino.
Well, and the companies that have structured the software know that, and they know that it's really hard for people to back away. That ping means somebody has said something about me or responded to something I posted, and um, it keeps drawing you back, drawing you back, and drawing you back.
So I think we may get to it's really about finding balance in all of this, right? And do you think we're going to get to a place where it used to be like have Wi-Fi in all the downtowns, but having places like our parks and public lands is what we do is we document them across the country. It's like a lot of the national parks were going through issues of fighting against Wi-Fi, and because it's actually in 5G, it's not actually good for the plants and the animals. And so to have these internet free zones is becoming a big discussion. And I kind of feel like we need to almost have those imposed on us. I'm not trying to be like New York where they said, okay, you can't have a big gulp or whatever it was. Was it New York City years ago? Like
Yeah.
just saying that's it, you can't. I mean, there's human adult responsibility we need to take, and I don't think we need people telling us what to do, but having some no phone zone unless emergencies in public spaces may be a good idea. Just, you know.
I wish we would pass the bell-to-bell phone prohibition rules across the country. Having worked in schools and done professional development, asking people to get rid of put their phones aside so that we can look at each other and talk
Hmm.
to each other and role play and have discussions. It's a problem for the people who are delivering the message, and it inhibits the interactive capacity. As much as I don't like censorship. I was an English teacher at one point in my life. I think, the
Unban the books. It's ridiculous.
yeah, unban the books, and let's bring more books into classrooms, instead of having reading take place on a screen. Let's put books back in the hands of kids, and let's put paper and pens and pencils back in their hands. There's quite a movement going on right now among
Hmm.
a number of experts in the field of child development and learning science that are saying, we don't learn as well from a screen as we do from reading text off of paper. And there's one fabulous neuroscientist researcher who has studied the reading brain. Her name is Marianne Wolf, and she talks about how the brain wires itself when we read text printed in our hands from the kind of wiring that goes on in the brain when you're scrolling vertically. And we
Oh,
turn pages left to right, but we often scroll. And there's just, she says, I'm so worried because we need to develop complex neural pathways in our brains so that we can understand complex ideas and we can solve complex problems. But that doesn't happen. The wiring of the brain doesn't happen the way it needs to
oh
when
wow.
everything is, consumed through a social media screen.
Mm.
And having been an educator and went back to school in my 50s to get a PhD on human behavior and human
Wow.
development, it makes me very concerned that, we may be losing some of our cranial capacity when it comes to how we think and how deeply we can think.
There's a sense of value to books too that are printed, you know. There's just a sense of, oh, this is a treasure. Someone did something. It's a craft. It's an art when it's printed out. There's just this added value. And I think, print magazines are returning, which we're not going to be doing here any fast times here at Big Blend because we come from the background, even from old school typesetting to, pre-computers to, so it's pretty crazy actually when I think about the journey of media of what's happening now. And it's just, I think it's about finding balance. It really is. And, take things as a tool, but don't do all. It's like you can't eat all chocolate cake all day. I'll try, but, I'll do my best. But you
Well,
can't smile all day either. We all want to be happy, but you can't physically smile every 24/7. It's your body won't do it. And so that's something when we look at screens, they're trying to do things like, hey, you used your phone more last week than the week before. But when you're talking about this scrolling thing, I heard a report and I believe it was that we scroll an average of 8 miles a year, human beings. Eight
oh,
miles. That's insane. That's
that,
insane. I mean, if, I'm just saying we should be looking at doing that every week or something as walking. But, and then you see people walk into things with their phone in their face. I see people in parks with their phone in their face,
yeah.
walking by a deer and her baby because I'm on my phone and whatever game I'm playing. And phones with all their reward systems. all the games with reward systems. It is like a nonstop casino.
It's an addiction too. I mean, I think it's intended to be.
Mhm. Pornography's on the rise because of it too. I know we weren't necessarily going to talk about pornography, but it is on the rise because of the advent of the internet
Yes,
and social media.
for sure it
Mm.
is. Sure it is. And, that's a whole field of study, the effects of exposure to pornography on young people as they're developing their sexual selves and forming attitudes and beliefs about what it means to be a
Mhm.
sexual person and what it means to engage in sexual behaviors with other people. Yeah, that definitely is a problem.
Yeah.
It's not good for young men,
Mm.
especially. I think.
Yeah, because it becomes a behavior as well. It's a habit, and
Like that crossover that I was talking about from reality to non-reality, and then how it spills back in again.
I wonder through this lack of connection if addiction is going up. Addiction is anything, right? So it could be the chocolate cake or the wine or whatever. But as we disconnect, we seek something to fill that void of that emptiness, right? So then all of this techno stuff starts to fill the void, which becomes an addiction versus dealing with someone, because dealing with someone may have been about pain. So people, when they felt pain with someone, close that door instead of trying again. So I wonder about that becoming where addictions will go up on all things, whether it's the technical media addiction or an addiction to drugs, all kinds of things, if that goes up. Because once you start those behaviors.
Years ago, a woman wrote a book, and I won't mention her name, but she was an expert in the field of bullying, social drama, and so forth. And she said kids are not addicted to their phones; they're addicted to each other. And I don't agree with that
Mm,
because I don't see kids who are together engaging with each other without the phones. I mean, even if
yeah,
it's just, sharing pictures, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, okay, let's share pictures, but oftentimes they're just texting back and forth to each other instead of looking at each other and speaking
right.
to each other. And I think kids see adults doing that all the time too. So it's normalized.
Mm. Ooh, what was the thing that made you write the book? What was that one? I know you're studying all of this. You've been an educator, but also really studying, human behavior, which is really interesting. But what was it that made you go, you know what? I've got to write this book.
Well, it started with my dissertation findings, which was on adolescence, and then we hit a place in our political world where I realized that adults were just over the top when it came to social drama, more so than kids. So I had the human development background. Mostly, I had focused on adolescence, but it pushed me towards looking at lifespan development and changes in behavior through the course of life. And I had been looking at personality disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, histrionic personality disorders as they manifested themselves in adolescence. But the research was like, well, narcissism is on the rise among the adult population, and there's evidence that points to that. So I stopped and I started reading, and I had written 40,000 words, and I had to cut it in half, shift the focus, because I realized that when adults are the problem, we have a bigger problem than just young people. And I think I didn't want to start a panic about kids because I felt that their drama was was part of their growth. It was identity work. Whereas adults who do these really immature and outrageous kinds of things, that's not an identity development. That's an indication that you have a personality disorder.
Mm,
And so that kind of became the focus of the book, and knowing from even the work I did with teens that the internet and phones and texting, you look at somebody with, raised eyebrow, the next thing you know, it blows up on, Facebook or, Twitter or something. And I thought to myself, we're all adopting these bad behaviors, and they're hurting us, and they're fracturing the fabric of our society. So that's kind of where it all went. I didn't know
yeah.
that's what it was going to be when I started writing, but it really became an effort of social commentary. And my goal, as I said in the book, is to get people to have more conversations about how all of this is affecting us and what we can do to reconnect, to
Yeah.
rebuild our human relationships and not lose them the way we've begun to lose them.
Yeah, I think like some restaurants do that. This is a no cell phone, zone. Talk to each other. I've seen things like that, which I love. I love, but I'm so glad you've written it because I think it's a wake up call that in South Africa where I used to live, call books like yours a fat wake up call. So it's a big fat wake up, not a wake up call. It's like a fat wake up, and that's what I was like. Oh, your book is a big fat wake up. It's just, I think it's really timely. It's necessary for sure. So everyone, again, it's Kathleen P. Allen. The book is called Stuck in Our Screens, Setting Aside Social Drama and Restoring Human Connection. The Amazon link for the book is in the episode notes. As always, thanks for listening. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been wonderful.
Now I'm going to check my phone. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.